And welcome once again to another episode of the Horizon Roundtable. I am Bob McDonald, and you can find me on Twitter at Bob McDonald. And joining me, of course, is my co-host Matt Dudek.
Hey there, everybody.
And Matt, you can find on Twitter at GrizzTalkOU, and you can follow the show on Twitter at HorizonRT, as well as on Facebook at Horizon Roundtable. I don't know how many friends we have. Matt, you have any idea how many people like us? I have no idea.
Not very many. I don't think something's set up right on there. I need to fix it. Something's weird with the followers on there. I don't know. But it's there. Definitely there.
He's calling the platform weird, not the actual followers. I'm not. Yeah, so I don't know. Anyway,
Cool. But
but
yes.
but there we are. But Matt, we actually, the season has started, and there's just one more game. There's actually just games have been played, but there's just one team that has not yet started. And we're actually recording this during the week, but we'll post this on right at the day that they're going to be playing, and that's Detroit Mercy. And I'm really excited to have the voice of Detroit Mercy, Dan Hasty, on.
What's up, guys? Bob, Matt, good to talk to you.
Yes, thank you for joining us. We really we've been small story, small aside. Dan spends the summer calling minor league baseball, and we've been hit or miss for about 3 months now.
Yeah, that might be putting it lightly. This is kind of one of those at long last we finally got to do it type of things. This is good.
Yes, absolutely. Because I know we've been talking a lot on the podcast. We've talked a lot about the whole situation, what's going on with Detroit Mercy and everything. So we got the man on now. So it's great to have you on.
It's good to be here. No, thanks, guys. It's kind of a mystery as to what this team is going to be when it comes to Detroit Mercy. So we'll try. There's a lot to unpack here.
Absolutely. But I believe Matt had a question for wanted to have the first question. So let her rip, Matt.
So Dan, as a fellow Michigander, obviously we follow a lot of the same teams. I've followed your career for a while, so this is a really important question for me. What are the Tigers going to do next year? Because this is looking worse and worse.
Oh, brother, you got another hour? How long can we do this now?
Maybe that's a different podcast. That might be my bad, man.
I believe I run one of those podcasts. You know what? There's a lot that needs to be done there, and from a creative aspect, I think it's important for those guys to figure things out from that perspective. They're kind of behind the eight ball in a couple of very critical ways. Now, they do have a couple of high-end performers, but they need a little bit more help behind these 3 or 4 big prospects that they have. And like you said, that might be a whole nother show, but they just need a little bit more of a supporting cast to support a couple of headliners. So, that's hard to find.
Isn't that kind of what's going on in Detroit Mercy? You know who the star is, but then you got to figure out what the supporting cast. Isn't there kind of a lineage there, a little line between them?
I see what you've done now. Yes. It's funny. What is it about Detroit-based teams that have superstars, but then nobody behind them? You know what I mean? It feels like every Detroit team has a star or two, and then just nothing for the rest of the roster.
So
now, we don't know what Detroit Mercy is in terms of their supporting cast.
Isn't that how the Pistons won a NBA championship with just some guys? I mean, it works sometimes, I guess.
Well, even that Pistons team you're talking about, they didn't have one bona fide star, at least in the sense that they stood above the other stars.
That's right. They had some guys.
like right now, the Pistons have Blake Griffin.
Yes.
And that's about it.
He's just not on the floor.
And Andre Drummond is whatever you think of him. I don't think he's a superstar by any stretch, but you look and you see with Detroit Mercy, you see Antoine Davis, and that this is the guy that not only is taking the ball up the court, but is also, looking for his shot. And it's too bad because it would have been nice for Detroit Mercy to add a point guard or a really solid ball handler. And I don't know if they found that So that means that Davis is going to be essentially the point guard and shooting guard simultaneously. And it's one of his areas of his game that's a bit of a weakness, creating his own shot. You give him an open look, he'll bury it. I mean, he's
Sure.
so good at that. He's probably the best in the conference, if not the best, far beyond the conference. But, so basically taking the ball out of his hands helps him. Putting the ball in his hands doesn't. It might be better long-term for his development, but you'd love to see what he can do. Kind of like in a Michael Redd in his prime sort of way. Just a guy that runs around screens with a quick shot release, just like a dead-on accuracy kind of guy.
So I'm glad we've segued into the. I mean, it is obviously and it's Antoine Davis's world. We're just living in it right now. But I mean, I'm glad you brought up the whole some guys thing, because we're still kind of grasping for who exactly is going to be who's going to be playing alongside him. Now, as I understand it, Detroit did get kind of a big boost last week when they announced that Justin Miller got his transfer waiver, the forward out of Louisiana Lafayette, I want to say.
Correct.
Yeah, and you know what? I guess if you look at it from this way, there might be a little bit of an advantage this year in terms of spacing. So last year, their next best option was Josh McFarley, another backcourt guy. So basically, they were just playing, kind of hot potato in the backcourt. Mm-hmm. But now Antoine Davis has somebody he can throw the ball to down low, and if Miller can draw on a double team or so, then all of a sudden, if you have good ball movement, you can find an open Davis. So I'm sure they'll really feed off of that. They didn't have that last year. They didn't have, they had Gerald Blackshear, who was not even cracking 5 points a game. And for a big guy, 6'9", 6'10", he wasn't rebounding the basketball. This guy isn't as tall as Blackshear was, but he rebounds more. And sure. I think he scored 9 and 7 last year at Louisiana Lafayette. So the numbers support that he could actually be considered more of a threat. Got a chance to watch him in the scrimmage against Central Michigan. It's kind of a closed-door scrimmage. And he was great. 23 minutes, 18 points, 13 rebounds. I mean, really, really, really strong in limited work. So I'm sure they're going to lean on him quite a bit.
Huh. Interesting. And I guess that's, I mean, beyond Justin Miller, I mean, I guess I should ask. I mean, who else do we got now? Who else is with the Titans? Obviously, we all know that Dwayne. We all know that Derrick Rose's nephew and Brad Calipari are here. But who else do we got? Who else does Mike? Who else does Mike Davis have sitting there waiting in the wings?
Doesn't it feel like The Price is Right? Come on down. So. I would say at this point, once you get beyond Justin Miller, I think you really are. I mean, B.J. Maxwell's another guard, and we're talking about the lack of a ball handler. Mm-hmm. If there's
Uh-oh. We didn't lose him, did we?
I lost. I don't hear him.
You got me, guys? You got
Yes, me? Okay, wow. Little technical difficulties, folks. Nothing to be worried about.
That's right. That's what you get for living out in the boonies. So you were asking about who else?
Yeah,
so
you were starting on BJ Mac. Maybe BJ Mac. Maybe that's the secret code word, BJ Maxwell, that calls you. Makes your phone go out. I don't know.
Yeah, BJ Maxwell, the guy the government doesn't want you to know about. No, but BJ,
you know that we have that's going to stick with the Horizon League fans now, right?
That's right. He's the best kept secret. Don't talk about it. No, but he's actually hurt right now. So he's got a hand injury. Don't know if we're going to see him right out of the chute. But once they do get him healthy, then we're talking about a potential, backcourt, guy who can bring the ball up, a ball handler, and that can help make Antoine Davis a little more effective. Beyond that, I think it really just becomes who can take a step forward, particularly as a sophomore, because they have this group of sophomores that were under Mike Davis last year, his first recruiting class, when he had an entirely new roster. And by the way, since he got there, 100% roster turnover since that time. But Willie Isiani, he averaged almost 8 a game. He's a 6'8" guy who shoots threes. So he's a guy that stretches the floor. So he'll be your stretch 4. Chris Brandon, he had some pretty good games. He's, you know what, and we just kind of mentioned Andre Drummond. He's kind of an Andre Drummond-esque kind of player in the sense where he just has to stay locked in. And he can check in and he can check out. So there's something to kind of keep an eye on with Chris Brandon. But other than that, Bo Gajul, Marquise Moore, a couple of guys with size. I really like Marquise Moore's game. He's just a little bit of everything. I mean, he can stuff a stat sheet. You know, give him a year or so, maybe even this year, we'll see some more flashes of that. But it's going to be about those guys, especially those sophomores. Can they, after a year under Mike Davis, take that next step forward? Because that's what Mike Davis demands, and he expects a lot. And I think his kids know that. That's why they stick around.
Yeah, well, you mentioned a lot. Obviously, the lot part is definitely for him. At the very least, the schedule. I mean, you start the Detroit Mercy starts out like gangbusters because you start out with the 1-2 ACC punch in North Carolina, and then a week later at Clemson. I mean that's got to. I mean, and then 2 days later they're going all the way to Wyoming. What? Yeah, I love to see the frequent flyer miles on that.
Yeah, no kidding. Who's getting those Marriott points? That's what I want to know. But, you look at NC State.
You got to call dibs.
I'm curious, right? I'm not sure what NC State really is yet. I mean, they've got some talent. Markel Johnson's there, and we'll get a look at him coming up, if you're listening to this on Sunday, a little bit later on this afternoon. But
yes.
Markel Johnson leads that team. They just lost to Georgia Tech in their season opener, so they're going to be hungry for their first win. But then it's off to Clemson and like you said, Wyoming. But, that was one of the things we knew about MD, Mike Davis, when he got to Detroit Mercy. He was going to schedule some of the biggest and most well-known teams that Detroit Mercy could possibly find.
Sure.
And, when you're looking around and you see, different teams in the Horizon League playing, what is it, University of Phoenix.
Yes.
I mean, you feel pretty good when you get a chance to play against NC State, even if you're going to come into that game at a pretty significant disadvantage. But Gonzaga comes up there's Notre Dame on the schedule. Mm-hmm. So, hopefully next year with Brad Calipari around, I wouldn't be shocked at all if we saw Kentucky on the schedule for next season.
Interesting.
So, it's just one of the ways that Mike Davis has noticed that he's able to prepare his team, and it makes for a lot of fun.
Yeah.
It's funny because as an Oakland fan, when Oakland first joined the Horizon, before your time at Mercy, Dan, we caught a lot of flack. Or Campy that's not even a week. Campy got a lot of flack for his scheduling. It was very similar. But now pretty much the whole Horizon, especially with Mike Davis there, is doing that. And it's just gone from, they're dropping the RPI and they're going to get crushed by all these teams to, hey, this makes sense and prepares you. Makes your team better. And that, there's nothing wrong with that. And that's I actually like seeing the schedule that way. I wish.
Well, what's funny is that after last year, and Mike Davis could only do so much with last year's schedule. He had showed up basically inheriting what the previous regime had put in place. But he did have a couple of extra games he was able to work on. I think they got Butler and Xavier on his watch. But once they got through the non-conference schedule, a schedule that they really struggled in, as we kind of expected, they really did well out of the gate in conference play. I mean, they beat Wright State. They gave Northern Kentucky a run for their money. And Oakland, that game was pretty close, but they went 5-2 in their first 7 conference games. So clearly the non-conference schedule, you can make the argument that it helped. They were not able to sustain that. But they did have their game elevated once they hit conference play. Now it's just a matter of keeping it there.
Do you think that there's an effect on the home crowd when the team's gone for that long and you don't really get a chance to know them until conference play starts? Do you think that affects the home crowd, gets especially your students, your younger students involved, or that you lose that? Does that have an effect in your opinion?
You know what? I guess that is kind of up in the air still. I just don't know how much that's a priority. I think when it comes to Detroit Mercy basketball fans, they certainly have enough reason to come out. They know, who's going to be taking the majority of the shots. And, you look at all these different projections and different ratings, and we're talking about a kid in Antoine who's, a top 50 player in the country, and probably, and I don't think it's a stretch to say, he's easily the best NBA draft prospect in the entire conference, depending on whether or not he leaves. But
sure,
so there's a huge draw there. No, I don't think the fact that they're away, if anything, I think it puts them on television. I think it puts them in the consciousness a little bit more if they're playing a team like Clemson, or if they're playing a team like Gonzaga, rather than if they're playing, no offense, but like U of M Dearborn. Like, I think it's just a different ball game, and at least now we're like worthy of being on the ESPN scroll every single night.
Then wait, do we have U of M Dearborn fans listening to the show? I mean, thanks for listening if you are. I mean, but.
I'm sure there are nothing but good things for your club team in the future.
All right.
I have another question for Dan too. As we were talking about all the different pieces kind of falling into place, I keep hearing a rumor that there's spots open still on the team, and there's an international big that might be available for the second semester. Can you shed any light on that? Is that just fans talking? Is there anything to that, or what do you know about that?
Okay, so I have no clue. I have not heard a single thing on that. I like to refer to this as the pyramid scheme because apparently he's Egyptian. And so I have no idea who this person is, but from everybody that I've read, and I read message boards and things like that, and I see that Mike Davis has talked on different occasions about this mystery Egyptian big man that he's working on having by next month. I haven't seen any Egyptian big men in practice, so until one shows up, I haven't seen or gotten anything on the record. So, I mean, I don't expect to see anything like that, but they do lack for size. So if they do need one position, probably more than the others, they probably need some help under the hoop.
Now, verbal, I'm glad you brought that up because, per verbal commits, they still Detroit Mercy still has 3 scholarships left. I mean, obviously they didn't need them all. I mean, you don't really need one for Antoine Davis, so you're good on that front. What is it? I see, and you point to this mystery Egyptian guy as a potential, mid-season kind of person coming in.
Doesn't that sound like when somebody says, like, oh, yeah, I have a girlfriend. She's from Canada. She's actually there now.
Yeah, that sounds about right. But at the same...
I didn't mean to derail you.
No.
I could have really derailed this, but we're just going to keep going.
So Mike Davis's Egyptian girlfriend. There you go. I don't know.
Cleopatra.
Something like that. Anyway, and I mean, well, you guys are close to Canada, so I mean that excuse might actually work in Detroit. So, but when you look at the kind of the unfilled, what are kind of the drawbacks to that, though? I mean, yes, you might get somebody in, spring semester, but at the same time, then you also run the risk of, not having scholarship athletes for the depth. I think. I mean, is it because they brought in some of these guys who basically don't need a scholarship? Does it matter even?
Well, I think the way it's working, at least this season, is we haven't really even talked about this, but at the moment, Detroit Mercy is ineligible for postseason, and now were they likely to make it? I mean, it's hard to find a list that has Detroit Mercy at the top for the Horizon League, although crazier things have certainly happened. I mean, Detroit Mercy was picked to finish dead last year and ended up in a tie for 6th. So they clearly exceeded those expectations, courtesy of probably a particular player. But, so they find themselves, in this spot where they can't make the postseason. And I kind of wonder if Mike Davis is going to say, you know what, I'm not going to dedicate 3 scholarships to these kids who are coming through when I can go find 3 transfers next year, keep Antoine for a junior season, surround him with transfers, and then really make a run at this thing the right way. That's kind of my sneaking suspicion, because I don't think Antoine Davis goes pro after his sophomore year.
Interesting.
I knowing Antoine and knowing his father, like I've been able to get to know over the past year, I don't think there's any chance that he goes to the NBA. But, I mean, if he has an amazing season and he gets on a national platform, then sure. But, that's very possible. But you're going to have to continue to have those great games on those bigger stages, and it really hurts if you're not in the NCAA tournament. And right now, they're considered ineligible for that. So I don't see a scenario where he's not back for a third season. So I think keeping those scholarships open potentially gives Mike Davis the flexibility to surround him with more talent.
That was probably why it was kind of a surprise that Justin Miller got his transfer waiver, because obviously, he's coming in, and theoretically he could have came in, he could have been denied and waited a year and therefore getting into that situation of next year where the APR ban is not even a factor anymore. To which, and I know we've talked about it, we beat this subject to death. The whole entire situation surrounding Detroit Mercy's APR ban, and the fact we're recording this on November 6th, and the NCAA has still not made any kind of decision about this. Is that are we at a point where does it even really matter anymore? That Detroit Mercy isn't the appeal is still processing, because we're kind of at a point that the season is about to start and we have no idea nobody knows what's going on. I mean, does it really matter anymore? really
not at this point. No, not at this point. We're so close to the season starting. I mean, that was certainly a bigger issue, I would say, in the off season, because, and look, I mean, we can. I'm sure they can say one thing or another on this, but it can't help. It can't help in recruiting. It cannot be an asset for you. But it's a 1-year thing. So and in some ways you look at it and you go, okay, well, this in one way might actually keep a certain player here for another year. So
there you go.
Is it all bad? So you try to find the positives within that, and that certainly could be one of those. So, no, but we're so far into the game now where, I mean, the team you have is the team you have, and of course you'd like to get a couple of pieces. But I think they're in as good a shape as can be asked given their circumstances. And they're well coached. They really are. I mean, they have a head coach and a coaching staff that has that kind of killer instinct. They just need the players to find a way to grow into that similar mindset, and that's hard.
Sure. And I have long.
They've got one player right now who buys into that. They just need the rest on board.
There you go. Yeah. Well, as I've long said, you discount Mike Davis at your peril. Because I mean,
no kidding.
Well, we're talking about a guy who who had the unenviable task of having to take over for Bobby Knight at Indiana. I mean, his whole thing is turning programs around. He, after Indiana, he went to UAB, and then, obviously his run at Texas Southern was nothing short of phenomenal. And you look at that, and you can, and his whole thing, it looks like, is leave it better than you found it, because even now Texas Southern is really doing, he laid the foundation for Texas Southern to still be successful.
Yeah, you know what? And we talked about the Tigers at the very beginning of this. You know who Mike Davis kind of reminds me of in terms of like how he would equate to baseball? For you fans out there, I would say Buck Showalter is a name to keep in mind. I think Buck Showalter has always been a guy that's come into a place, and well, he hasn't necessarily won big there, and that's the difference, because Mike Davis has won something significant both in Indiana and when he was at Texas Southern. But he's always left programs, and in Buck Showalter's case, he's left teams better than when he found them. And that's one thing that Davis does have that track record for. And, whatever happens down the road, there's going to be a lot of good teams on this schedule. And,
Sure.
with Antoine Davis having gone through the program, I mean, there's a lot of things that will give this group momentum. And that's kind of one of those ripple effects throughout the whole university, especially since this is one of the first times that they've been really excited about a particular player at this level.
And that's really saying something, because Detroit Mercy has the history of those it players, with be it Ray McCallum Jr., be it Willie Green, be it Rashad Phillips, and I'm sure I'm missing somebody out of there.
You can go farther back too. I mean, you can go back, 50, 60 years. You talked about all that history. I mean, there's so many banners hanging up in that place. I mean, Terry Durod or Kierton. I mean, there's just so many different guys. Terry Tyler. I mean, they've always had these stars. But you mentioned Rashad Phillips, and really, since Rashad left, they really haven't had a player at that level until now. Like, Ray McCallum, he was a great player. But now I think it's pretty clear that Davis is one of the biggest things they've had going in a couple of decades.
And it's funny, and I know that we've had Rashad on the show. We've had Rashad on the show before. Unfortunately, again, missed him all summer. We were hoping to get him on the show too, because he just had one thing he did do, as I know, because I'm subscribed to Rashad Phillips' YouTube channel. He actually had a one-on-one with Antoine Davis that I have up there.
There's something I really like, and we haven't got a chance to talk about his game per se, but when it comes to Antoine, one of the things that people really don't talk about a whole lot is the fact that this kid's got a little bit of an attitude. And there's a little bit of a nasty streak in his game. And that's one thing we talked about, having that killer instinct. He just has it. And they probably don't want me telling you this, but I'll tell you this anyway. But there was a moment in the scrimmage last week against Central Michigan where they thought Central Michigan was complaining about too many foul calls. And Davis stepped back and right in the face of a defender hit a three. And as he turned to hustle back on defense, he started to rub his eyes like, boo-hoo, boo-hoo. It was great. It was so good. And I'm just like, I love this kid.
I'm on record as an Oakland fan, I love to hate on Detroit Mercy until a week ago, when I now hate Cleveland State more, but that's a different discussion. But I gotta say, Antoine Davis is a player I can't wait until he graduates so I can root for him. I really like everything about his game. I like his demeanor, even his online presence. I like the kid a lot. I can't root for him yet, but I can't wait until I can, because I think he's going to be great, and I like that stuff. He's got that little bit of a streak.
Yeah.
Even last year when Dad Mike Davis was complaining about what he thought was a lot of grabs and stuff on Antoine. Antoine's pretty quiet. He just was trying to get his shot. You don't see him complaining a whole lot on the floor, which I appreciate. And like I said, I'm excited to see where he goes in a year or two, whenever he does go. I'll become an Antoine fan then.
And we talked about Michael Redd, but there's no shame in having a career a la Jordan Crawford.
Sure.
A guy who stays in the league for a long time, maybe not necessarily a starter, but a guy that just comes off the bench and can bury threes for you. And we know that Antoine Davis can do that in bunches. There's a place in the league for him. I don't think there's any doubt about that. It's just going to be a question of, the thing about Antoine is he just has to put on some weight. He's so rail thin skinny. And last year it was pretty clear that while outstanding and very talented, he was not physically built to handle the beating of a full season. And, when you looked at his high school numbers, he didn't go to high school, he was homeschooled, so he played in a couple different circuit leagues, but he didn't play a lot. So the grind of the season really kind of took him down. So now this year, it's going to be finding a way to finish out the season strong.
Well, that was something that I brought up last year when we were in the resurgence of Antoine Davis. We did see kind of, and I brought it up a couple of times, that he came out shot out of a cannon, and I always thought my concern, of course, was always that, wow, he's how can he endure? How is he gonna he's great now. How is he going to do, near the end of the season? I did notice that, he did have some, some down games, but by and large, he was pretty consistent throughout the conference season. It also probably helped he had a second scoring option in Josh McFawley too.
Yeah, that certainly helped. And it's one of those cases where the numbers and the eye test were different. He still was able to score pretty consistently as to his per game average. He was up around 28, 29 a game. I think he finished at 26. Mm-hmm. But you could see that he was essentially having to go about it in a very different way down the stretch. Whereas maybe in the first half of conference and in non-conference, he was able to, cross over a defender, step back and hit a three. More toward the end of the season, even though he was still hitting threes, he wasn't hitting as many, and he realized that he needed to get to the line. And in doing so, it was starting to really take a toll because, to get to the line, you've got to go to the hoop. If you're going to go to the hoop, you're going to get hit. So, he had to kind of decide, all right, I'm going to trade in, the step back three for the up-team's time and go to the hoop instead. So we'll see if this offseason got him a little bit stronger and more prepared, because if he can do that, he's going to be a lot fresher. And that's another thing. Kind of like, with the way the Pistons are with Derrick Rose right now, they don't want to run him out, 35 minutes a night. And I'm sure Mike Davis would love to have anybody who could handle the basketball in a way that he trusts to give Antoine even the smallest breaks, because he is going to play 35 a night. Sure. But you don't want him playing 40.
So who else is handling the ball? Like, is Calipari actually part of the rotation, or is he a stunt for the name? Like, we talked about who else is there, but who's actually in the rotation right now as of the scrimmage that you watched?
So basically, in terms of what I think the five will be, I think a guy that we haven't talked about yet is Alon LeGrand, Jr. out of Harlem. He transferred from community college. I think we'll see some of him. He's just kind of a Swiss Army knife. So I think they'll give him a chance to, play his way into a significant role. Chris Brandon, we talked about him kind of trying to take that step forward as a sophomore. If they can get B.J. Maxwell back, he was a 10-5 guy at Abilene Christian last year. I'm sure they would love to see what he could do. He's a, kind of one of those guys they're relying on to take the McFawley role. But, we'll see if he's able to get healthy soon. Dwayne Rose, I don't really know what to expect from him. Super athletic, tough finishing at the basket, at least so far. Thinking like Rodney Stuckey, but he is definitely an athlete, and he's got a lot of things to his game that can translate if he can finish at the hoop. But Calipari, you mentioned him. Haven't seen him enough to think he'll be a mainstay, at least in the starting lineup. Could see him coming off the bench. He is a spot-up three. So you're hoping, kind of considering his background, maybe a 3-and-D kind of player. But that's kind of – and then a Willie Isiani. He's certainly going to be somebody that they bounce off of and try to get some open looks for. He loves to shoot the three. Our big running joke on the sidelines last year was, will Willie ever shoot a 2-point shot? There was a point where I think he had about 19 field goal attempts, and 18 of them were from three. So he's just that kind of guy. So, and you know what? With the lack of size Detroit Mercy has, to take their four and get another big body away from the basket, that does help increase Detroit Mercy's chances under the hoop. It becomes a simple numbers game.
So this is where Mike Davis's Canadian girlfriend would be good to have.
Yeah, I would call her, but she actually disconnected her phone. So,
when you look at the Horizon League as a whole, we've talked about this as well. Plenty of times, the big thing, the general consensus is that Wright State's the team to beat. The general consensus is that Cleveland State and IUPUI are going to be at the bottom. But that 2 through 8, which Detroit Mercy is a part of, you could throw a blanket over those guys, all those teams. So say for best case scenario, the NCAA comes down and says, "We're sorry, guys, our bad. Here, your appeal is approved, and now you're eligible for things." What would it take? Where do you see Detroit Mercy kind of in that log jam between 2 through 8 at this point? Even in the best case scenario where they do get their eligibility for postseason back.
They're kind of like the old song Bohemian Rhapsody when the band Queen made them. Either they're going to be a huge hit or a huge flop. Like, there's really not a whole lot in between for this squad. I saw them picked as low as 9. I mean, they were picked 10th last year, and they were able to go out and exceed those numbers. But, I think they could just as easily, especially since what you just talked about. There's no clear-cut second team behind Wright State. You can maybe make a case for Northern Kentucky, but they're in a coaching transition. Those are always a little bit tough. UIC is a really interesting team. I really like UIC this year. Green Bay, I guess we'll wait and see what that squad looks like, but I liked what they had on the court last year. Green Bay, they're just good. I mean, last year Sandy Cohen was outstanding. Obviously, they lost him, but I think you could just as easily see Detroit finishing somewhere around 3, maybe 2 or 3, as you could around 8 or 9. But I do think that they're well coached, and I do think that has a huge bearing on just a couple of games. I think a good head coach can win you 2 or 3 games in the course of a given year. So, if they scrape in, I can see them scraping into the tournament. But, right now it's hard to go against Wright State. They just have so much talent. Loudon Love is just a handful down there. Although Detroit was able to contain him pretty well, the rest of the Horizon League did not, and I'd expect to have him come back and have a pretty big year. I assume at the end of the day, it's going to be a 2-horse race between Loudon Love and Antoine Davis for the Player of the Year.
That would be best. Again, that is also the general consensus. I think one of the things that we talked about, obviously, is kind of Antoine Davis is regarded basically as the preseason player of the year. He's been picked everywhere as the preseason player of the year. Does he? If for some reason Detroit stumbles and they finish 8th, what does it look like? What does that do to his chances of being named the regular season player of the year?
Yeah, you know what? To have success down the stretch and in the tournament does carry some weight. I know that it's, you're trying to go off of the regular season, but I mean, last year, look at Drew McDonald. I mean, it was Northern Kentucky that got out of the conference tournament by getting in there. All of a sudden, you see what they were able to accomplish. And so I do see the validity to what you're saying. I mean, you can't miss the tournament and be considered a super valuable player to your team. So they're going to have to get some help for him. And he's going to have to help himself. So, he had a big off season this past year. So we'll see, if he put the time in. He's still going to roll out of bed and score 20. The question is A, can he get his teammates involved? And B, can they be good enough to take just a little bit of pressure off of him? Because if you give him an inch, he takes a mile. So just giving him that extra inch will go a long way for him and the rest of that squad.
And I'm also sure they would love an assist from the NCAA sometime soon. Would be nice.
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, I do think there's still a chance for that, especially considering their argument of, hey, we had nothing to do with this.
That's true.
This happened 5 years ago, and none of this was under the watch of anybody who's still on this coaching staff or on this roster. So, and we've talked about this. I'm sure you guys have talked about this on different shows where is it fair, and you can do it over basketball or college football, to penalize a group of kids for what a previous regime or a previous roster did. It just doesn't seem fair. And so, I think we take out the technicalities and just look at common sense and the intention and the spirit of the rule. And I think the NCAA wouldn't have to think very hard about it.
And yet, somehow common sense is kind of a fleeting thing in the NCAA offices from time to time. So we'll see.
We're dealing with that, we're dealing with that with the Rashad Williams stuff right now, where no one at Cleveland State was was there when Rashad started there, but yet they're the ones that have made his life difficult and made it so he was denied. It's the NCAA sucks. I can say that I have no affiliation with anything, so I don't care.
I think
waiting on the NCAA is like waiting on the DMV. I mean, it's just there's a long. Bring your phone, find something to do, and you'll hear from them when they call your name.
And they'll have an attitude at the end of it and make it seem like if you missed something, you're dumb. Which that's awesome. And so, one last thing I wanted to ask. Obviously, since we have Matt on, who's an Oakland fan, and of course we have the Oakland Detroit Mercy, that whole thing. And as we know, of course, the issue has been that Oakland has pretty much dominated that series for several years. Are we going to get to a point where Detroit Mercy finally gets back in the game?
Yes.
I mean, we have to at some point, right, Matt?
I mean, both schools are better.
Look, they were ill-equipped to have that real fighting chance last year. I mean, essentially, and you saw this, I mean, they were basically going 1-on-5 for the majority of the season. And so, how different is that this year? I don't know. I mean, there are some similarities, although I think spacing, like we talked about, is going to be a little bit better this year as it was last year. So in terms of, will Detroit find success against Oakland? They almost beat the Grizzlies back in, Detroit in the first meeting between those two teams. And I remember Greg Campy saying that, that win for his team was easily the biggest one they had that whole season. He was definitely concerned. And I think more importantly than anything else, he wanted to set a tone against Mike Davis. That's a Big Ten, matchup, if you will. I mean, that's a guy who's been able to coach and have success in one of the bigger conferences in all the country. So I do think in time we're going to see that. But is it this year? I mean, look at Oakland right now. I mean, that roster is very, very green. I mean, there's a lot of new faces, and we see that year in and year out. And if anybody can find a Braden Norris, it's probably Greg Campy. So we'll see who he's able to pull out of his hat. They still have a lot of height. They've got a lot of good bigs with Hill Mays. They've got, obviously, with Brad Brechting. I've really become a fan of his game. They've got some pieces down low, so they're going to be a handful for anybody they play.
And you know who's actually going to be the biggest handful? Because everyone knows about, Brechting and Hill Mays because that's, they've been around. If you haven't watched any film or anything, Daniel Ladapo is going to be a terror in the Horizon League. He's that.
Yeah, you know what? You're not the first person that's mentioned that. I've seen some stuff on him, and boy, I mean, that's a talent. And you give him, you put those guys next to Hill Mays, next to Brechting. I mean, that's like something out of Space Jam. I mean, those are the Monstars right there.
All they need is someone to get them the ball, which they kind of are lacking right now. It's that point guard problem. But man, those three. I mean, yeah, we played Goshen. It wasn't, no one's making it to be anything other than what it was. But yeah. 3 games now, exhibitions and all that. Daniel Ladapo looks like the real deal. If that team can stay healthy with those 3 bigs, that's scary for anybody in the Horizon because nobody's got that kind of size.
They're just so good in terms of player development. And I always respect coaches and coaching staff who can excel in that area. It's almost like, the names change out every year, but the results remain the same. And that's one thing that I've always been very jealous in some ways and really admired as to what they've been able to do over there. And I think that's one of the reasons that Detroit Mercy took the leap with Mike Davis. They're trying to find a similarity where they can find guys and kind of unearth diamonds in the rough just in the same way that is going on up in Auburn Hills.
And Bob, I don't know if you know this, Dan used to at least fill in, I think, for Oakland games. I know you've called some Oakland games in your past life too, have you not?
Yeah, they burned the tapes, I'm sure. I think there was some women's basketball back in the day. I think I may have helped out Neil with a game or two on the men's side as well. I can't remember. It's been a long time, but there was a time.
There you go. Okay. All right. Well, Dan, that's going to wrap it up for us. So, Dan, thank you very much for joining us. Dan, tell everybody where they can find you on the radio and online.
Yeah, well, basically the flagship station is 910 Superstation. So you can obviously, in the easier way in 2019 is just to go on your phone and go online and find it. So I would go to Detroit Mercy on their website, so DetroitTitans.com. But another easy way, 9:10 a.m. Superstation. You click the button and it sends it right to our broadcast. You can also listen to it through the website. So, and I will say this: if you want to listen, if you listen to any part of the broadcast, do yourself a favor and listen to the conversation with Mike Davis after every game, because it is amazing. I've never talked to somebody who I honestly have thought we might have to dump what he's about to say because it might give us an FCC violation. He is totally raw in those moments. And there have been times, and it's my low-key personal favorite, when he finishes the interview and you just hear the sound of a thud in the background of the conversation, and then he walks away, and then you hear something that you're really happy that he didn't say 20 seconds prior. His stuff is great, and I love talking to him because he gives you stuff that's not kind of wrapped in a nice, pretty bow. It's very honest, and it's very genuine, and that's the kind of thing that people can relate to.
Can we get a Campy and Davis like press conference where they're both just unfiltered at the same time, like not even one at a time, but both of them in the same room and just hear what they both have to say about a situation?
Absolutely.
Yeah, no kidding. Those two have figured that out, and I wish a lot of the other coaches in the league would take a page out of their playbook.
Yeah, that's it. And where can everybody find you online, Dan?
Well, if you go to Twitter, it's at @DanHasty. You can just find me over there. We'll obviously be, talking a whole lot about the NC State, the Clemson, the Wyoming trips, and Gonzaga. I'm a sucker for a photo of an arena or stadium, so there will be many of those in the coming weeks.
Very good. All right, so that's going to about do it. You can, as always, you can find episodes of the Horizon Roundtable on our website at horizonroundtable.com. You can find us wherever podcasts are available, and I don't think we missed any of them now. I think we're on every one of them. And you can you can pull us up on your Amazon Echo or your Google Home devices. We don't do lyrics, so if you have one of those Amazon devices with the display, all you're just going to see is the Horizon Roundtable logo. Sorry, we're not transcribing it. It takes a while to put this together anyway. But again, Dan, thank you very much for coming on, and as always, thank you for listening.
Guys, thanks for having me. Keep up the good work.
Thanks for coming on, man. We really appreciate it. That was great.